FCM 36, or Tractor RN3 as FCM called it, was something of an outlier in the race to replace pretty much the entire French tank fleet, which was started by Hotchkiss back in 1933. Over a dozen companies submitted bids to build the replacement tanks, and only 4 made it as far as building a pilot. The orders for Renault and Hotchkiss soon started coming in, and the submission from Batchat never really made it past the pilot stage. FCM, however, did actually get built, albeit for quirky reasons, not in great numbers. We are in Saumur to check theirs out. As you look at the vehicle, the obvious thing that shouts at you is the angled, welded nature. Compared to the other tanks that were entered into the series, 2 of them were round and cast, and the third one from Batcha was at least angular, but also still cast. The reason behind the welded structure is FCM's background. They primarily made ships, although they had achieved some notoriety or fame, depending on the point of view, for building the massive 2C tanks earlier. Welding provided a number of advantages, but there was a significant problem from the perspective of the French government buying these things. Welding was a practice that only skilled workers could do, and they got paid more. Plus, FCM also had to divert their workers' resources towards building ships as well as building tanks. As a result, although the FCMs were built very quickly due to the production advantages of welding, not many orders came in the first place. As you can see, the slope is from all sides, and it sort of irritates me a little bit when people look at the T-34 and say, hey, it developed sloped armor. So, well, no, the FCM-36 would like a word. In fact, a lot of other earlier tanks would like a word, but that's beside the point. Now, one of the limitations with sloping inwards is they have a smaller turret ring, which means you have a smaller turret. However, in the case of the French tanks, that actually wasn't so much of a problem because they specifically wanted one-man turrets for a couple of reasons. That actually made, at the time, a fair bit of sense. One very easy advantage was that if you had a turret light enough with the same turret ring, you could just plug it onto an FT, and that was much cheaper. A bigger problem, though, is manpower. Remember, the France was still recovering from the massive dearth of manpower suffered after the end of the First World War. So they didn't really have many men to put into many tanks. So you could either have a few 3-man tanks or a lot of 2-man tanks. It was decided that having more 2-man tanks was better. The other advantage is that a smaller 2-man tank uses less metal. It's faster to produce, it's cheaper to produce. All these things are very important to the French government at the time. So, a 1-man turret it was. With the benefit of hindsight, this can be said to be penny wise and pound foolish. But at the time, there was a certain logic behind their actions. The 4-centimeter thick front hull is dominated by the large 3-piece driver's hatch. It opens in a certain sequence, firstly the upper visor, then the right-hand door, and then the left-hand door. Now, in order to get in and close it behind you, the catches at the hydraulics are on the outside. So as you're about to climb in, you push down on the release, and then you get in through the unsupported, very heavy armored door. And then you close it all up around you. Not ideal. Other components on the front of the vehicle, well, you have the typical French shrouded headlight of the time. The horn is on the far side, and you can see also one of the vision slits easily enough. The advantage of the angled superstructure on the FCM compared to the cast hulls of the others is that the vision slits give you a wider field of vision than they gave you. Moving back from the idler, you pass by the track tension system. It's a simple large nut on a screw, nothing unusual there. You go to the first roller, which as near as I can tell is just to fill in the gap between the idler and the first road wheel. The road wheels themselves, they are 4 bogies. Each bogie has a pair of wheels. If you look at them, they look almost like they are 2 different wheels paired together, but it seems that it's just one wheel with a groove cut in between the 2. To lubricate them, you have these little access ports here behind wing nuts. Just open up the wing nut, pull off the panel and you can access the grease points, and the pipes will go to wherever it is on the system that the grease needs to get to. Up above you can see the large mud chutes. Mud clogging was a perpetual problem with this tank. It was never entirely solved, and I'm not entirely sure why, because looking up underneath it, there's nothing but track. There were various proposals made, such as remove the rollers and replace them with skids that would give more room for the mud to fall out, or simply remove the side skirting entirely and make the inner wall thicker. Obviously it didn't happen. Last thing I mentioned is just on the upper hull, there's plenty of room for the Pioneer kits, and there is a marker light just on top. In common with the FT that started it all, the entire powertrain for this tank is at the rear. The large sprocket wheels, though, only have one set of teeth, unlike the more typical pair. These mesh in with the single-pin, short-pitch track links. The only bolts on the entire tank are those which are necessary to get at the engine compartment, and you can see that the compartment itself has a long, sloping tail with the exhaust that divert forward. Underneath these hatches back here, you're going to see the steering system. One large component on each side of the differential. And here's one I prepared earlier. As you can see, this engine is undergoing a bit of a restoration right now. The top half is missing, but you can see that it is a Berliet Ricardo 4-cylinder diesel water-cooled engine. Puts out about 91 or 105 horsepower, depending on which source you want to use. The choice of a diesel was a little bit unusual for the time. It had a couple of advantages though, one of which was you could go about 200 kilometers on a mere 217 liters of fuel. Another advantage was that it was less likely to catch fire, at least that was the perception. However, there was a Calumet fire extinguisher installed in the system. On the other hand, the downside was that you had to have a separate fuel logistics train just for this type of tank, because pretty much everything else that the French were using was petrol. This led to a few problems later on. Access to the turret for the commander is by way of the large hatch door in the turret rear, pretty common to most of the French tanks of the era. Interestingly, the turret seals up sufficiently that this is the first tank to have an NBC overpressure system, and it's worth remembering the use of gas quite frequently barely 2 decades prior. The FCM's turret is considered to be more roomy than the APX as found on the Renault and Hotchkiss, and although it is a relative statement, I can easily see why. This is significantly better, and it's still bad. Vision is provided by way of these little slots. They are either low ones if I'm down manning the gun, or higher ones if I'm standing up. And it's absolutely atrocious. I can hardly imagine even finding my friends, let alone finding enemies to shoot who might be trying to kill me. I am kneeling down on the base of the floor. There was a folded down seat, an actual seat, which was attached to the firewall, sadly detached from this particular tank. And that certainly beats the little sling thing that would be on the Renault and Hotchkiss, and frankly I'm not even sure how I would use that because the interior is absolutely horrendous. The SA-18 is the same gun as found on pretty much everything else. It is the World War I 37, very short gun, does all of about 2 centimeters worth of armor penetration with an AP round, and was simply a matter of economy. There was already plenty of ammunition in stores. There were the guns that you could simply take off the FT if you didn't want to put new turrets on them or what have you. Interestingly, although this gun shares the shoulder pad and hand grip elevation system, as you would imagine with the sight here, it also has a level of traverse independent of the turret. This is fairly unique and very handy when it comes to aiming. There is of course a regular traverse hand wheel, although it does go in reverse, so you would expect if you crank clockwise, the turret would turn clockwise. It doesn't, it goes backwards. You crank clockwise, the turret turns left, as you can see. There was an attempt to mount a larger gun, the 37mm SA-38, as could be found on maybe the Hotchkiss or Renault as well. However, the welds on this turret couldn't take the incredible force of this devastating weapon. So the solution was they actually had to make an entirely new turret. The problem was that although one was made and had an internal mantlet and it worked, they built it just before France surrendered, and well, that was the end of that story. Not much else to be said. Here on the right hand side would be the 7.5mm machine gun with the drum magazines. I do note that in this turret they have found room for a ready rack of 3 rounds of ammunition on the right hand side. The cupola is effectively an extension of the turret sides. It's probably made manufacturing very simple. It's no worse than the other options with the little dome cupola on the other tanks, but that's basically the blind leading the blind. It's horrible. I can understand why folks would open the back hatch and just stick their head out that way until people actually start shooting at them. It's the only way you'll be able to see anything. So that's it for the commander's position. I shall now move forward. And this was doing so well as well. So one of the big advantages to having the engine and transmission at the back of the tank is that, unlike, say, the Renault, you don't have to leave the powertrain on the right hand side. It's not taking up room inside the hull. This is great. You got more room for the driver, you got more room for the ammunition, you've got more room for the radio. You could actually put an ER-54 into this if you had one. Sadly, the driver's position lets it all down. I'm not quite sure where to start. I am on a cushion on the floor of the hull. It does have a backrest. The backrest is absolutely murdering my back because the only way I can fit right now is by leaning, in a somewhat supine position. Now, my first question is how big people's feet were back then, because you can see my toe on the brake is kind of blocked by the lever for the hatch, which is, I would argue, a bit of a problem. The clutch, I can operate on the left-hand side. That's not too difficult. The 2 levers for steering, well, okay. And I can get to the accelerator easy enough. 5-speed manual transmission on the right. It's pretty conventional. So reverse is forward, then 1, 2, 3. It's clearly marked. And the driver's dial is similarly on the right-hand side of the hull. My first thought, actually for all of these 2-man tanks that I've been in over the last couple of days, is these guys had more guts than I do. Now, granted, it probably beat walking into machine gun fire, but my words fail me. This is an astonishing way to go into battle. And unfortunately, although this may be the best of the infantry tanks that the French had, I don't think that counts for enough. Anyway, I'm gonna get out of here before my back decides I need to go see a chiropractor. And I'm not sure how. Oh my God, the tank is on fire? The hell? I got another 9. Ow. Take the microphone with me. Ah, Jesus. Overall, 400 tanks were ordered, although only 100 were ordered early enough to actually be built. They acquitted themselves reasonably well, as perhaps the best of the 2-man tanks. However, they did have the misfortune of being at Sedan, which did not go well for the French, regardless of what kind of tanks they had in either case. It may or may not say something for the FCM, but the vast majority were not lost due to mechanical defect, but were instead lost to either combat or supply issues. Those which were captured by the Germans ended up being converted into artillery pieces, either indirect or anti-tank. So that's it. This is a short video because it's a very simple 2-man tank with, well, not much to be said about it. I'll see you in the next one. And for the Bataillon Chantigny, Batignolles Chantillon. I'll call it Batcha. I thought you guys might like to have a better view from the front, just in case the view from the rear didn't give you the exact experience of just how crowded I am. I mean, I feel like I'm, in an egg, all curled up, ready to hatch and be sprung into the world. Yeah, no. Besides, that's far too poetic for me. Just let me get out of here. Please? Okay.